Now I'd like to introduce one of the Planning Committee members, Patrick Stover, who will provide introductory remarks about this workshop. Along with being a Food Forum member, Patrick is Vice Chancellor and Dean for Agriculture and Life Sciences at Texas A&M AgriLife and Director of the Texas A&M AgriLife Research. He's internationally recognized as a leader in biochemistry and nutrition, and his research focuses on the biochemical, genetic, and epigenetic mechanisms that underlie the relationships between folic acid and human pathologies such as developmental anomalies, neuropathies, and cancer. He's an elected member of the National Academy of Sciences and a fellow of the American Association for the Advancement of Science. Patrick?
Very much, Naomi. And welcome to all of you to today's Food Forum workshop, Healthy People, Healthy Planet, Building a More Sustainable, Resilient, Equitable, and Nourishing Food System. Today, I will be focusing my remarks as an overview of the new expectations we have of the food system, focusing primarily on publications that have come out of the Food and Nutrition Board on this topic over the past few years. So these are my disclosures. I have no conflicts of interest relevant to this presentation, and all of my research funding has come from federal sources. So earlier this year, the USDA Secretary of Agriculture, Sonny Perdue, announced the USDA Innovation Agenda that stated two bold goals for agriculture to be achieved by 2050. First was to increase food production by 40%, and second was to shrink the environmental footprint of agriculture by 50%. Indeed, we live in interesting and a critical time in human history where now we understand that food systems, people, the environment, and the economy are interconnected and interdependent on each other. And all of these domains are at risk if not brought into harmony with one another. This will require a systems thinking approach to all aspects of agriculture, food, health, the economy, and the environment. Now, some problems are old problems, as the Secretary noted. We still need to produce more food. The world's population is estimated to grow to 10 billion by 2050, and we need to produce more food on less land with growing water constraints, as population growth is eliminating farmland in the US, a major food exporter, at an alarming rate. But we know we also have to produce better food. The number of malnourished and food insecure people is expected to increase globally, and in the US, diet-related chronic disease is a major driver of healthcare costs, as it is globally. Indeed, the expectations of food and agriculture have changed dramatically. Following World War II, there were historical expectations of the food system, and that was to produce and even overproduce food, fiber, and fuel for the growing economy. But now expectations have shifted markedly the past decade or so. Now the target is to nourish and to sustain food for lifelong health, nourish and sustain our environment, nourish and sustain agriculture in a way that it's economically viable for years to come. Furthermore, now there have been major advances in science and technologies that have enabled us to do things our predecessors only dreamed of. We have the capacity to make the food system what we want. Do we want to avoid nutrient deficiency and optimize function as we have primarily focused on in the past? Or now do we want to prevent and manage chronic disease? Do we want to lower the environmental footprint, as the Secretary noted? Do we want to ensure that agriculture is economically sustainable? Do we want to support the diversity of the food supply that we have now? Do we want to continue to try to make food as affordable and accessible as we can? Do we want to use agriculture to lower healthcare costs? And in fact, this was a specific mandate in the 2020 Agriculture Appropriations Bill, where it was specifically stated that agriculture can be used to create healthier food that enhances overall health, reduces obesity and related comorbidities, and ultimately lower healthcare costs. So indeed, expectations have changed. Now, I would like to think that a lot of what we're doing today, I would like to think that the workshop we're doing today really had its roots back in 2012 with the publication of a workshop from the Food and Nutrition Board on exploring the health and environmental costs of food. You know that the food system we have today was created to eliminate hunger with affordable, accessible food, or should I say calories. But in doing so, we shifted costs elsewhere. Today, we recognize that food systems have pushed costs of producing unexpected food into other domains, such as the healthcare system, into environmental systems, and even into national security. And this has led to the idea that we need to take a systems approach to economics and really internalize the externalities, such as healthcare costs, environmental costs, national security costs, that ultimately are tied to our food and agriculture system. And that workshop really led to this consensus committee report that really serves as the backbone for today's workshop. And this committee report laid out a framework for assessing the effects of the food system. And I just want to walk through it very quickly, this infographic. But this report was structured such that we could make more holistic, science-informed decisions about food system policy and food system practice. And the report emphasizes the new expectations of the food system. That is, food systems should promote human health, environmental health, social health, and economic health. Those are the 4 key outcomes. The report also emphasizes that any analysis of the food system should include an evaluation of the effects on the entire ag and food value chain, everything from farm inputs all the way down to consumer behavior and consumer health, and to look at potential unintended consequences across that food value chain. The report also emphasizes that we have to take into consideration dynamics in the food system, such as social movements, such as weather, such as market forces, and maybe even, as we'll see today, a pandemic and the effect that that would have on the food system. And lastly, it emphasizes that we really have to develop and use the best metrics, methods, methodologies, and standards of evidence so we can bring to bear the very best science to inform practice and policy in the food system. So that's an overview of this report. I really recommend that you read this report because it really focuses on how we can achieve these new expectations of the food system. The report emphasizes that the food system is a complex, dynamics, adaptive system where you have flows of food and services all the way from farm inputs to the consumer. And then you have reverse flows from the consumer back to farm inputs focused on money and demand information. But you also have a lot of actors and players and domains that then serve to influence these flows, such as social organizations, science and technology, the biophysical environment, markets and policies. So this truly is a complex adaptive system and requires a system approach to its study, to its evaluation. And so again, the framework report walks through how one might do an assessment of the food system, starting from stating the problem down to writing the report. What I just want to emphasize is the report really focuses on the idea of trade-offs. That is, if we have 4 primary expectations of the food system around health, environment, social, and economic, these may not all be in harmony, and we have to understand the trade-offs between these various outcomes. It also stresses heterogeneity. That is, for all of these outcomes and all of these modifiers, they are very heterogeneous. Populations, individuals are heterogeneous, as is environment, social, and economic effects. Now, we're also going to hear today that there are technological advancements that are also being now introduced into the food system that can have a transformation, that can truly transform the food system. And for one example here is we understand in the US that agriculture accounts for about 10% of the greenhouse gas emissions here in the United States. Globally, that number has been estimated to be higher because of issues of deforestation and such. But in the US, the number is estimated to be about 10%. But as Dr. Lau said when he received the 2020 World Food Prize, he was quoted as saying, "A mere 2% increase in the carbon content of the planet's soils could offset 100% of all greenhouse gas emissions going into the atmosphere." That is, while agriculture now contributes to greenhouse gas emissions, it potentially is the solution to greenhouse gas emissions, and we have to be solution-oriented. So you're seeing a lot of innovation all across the food system on how to lower that environmental footprint. We know that there's concern over the methane footprint of livestock, but we also see innovations in food and probiotics that seek to lower that methane footprint. We know that chemical fertilizers and their runoff can cause eutrophication of the Gulf of Mexico. But we see these regenerative approaches where we take animal waste and use that as fertilizer to enrich the soil to make it more healthy and to promote plant growth, thereby lowering the environmental footprint. So we have to continue these innovations. We'll hear more about those today. And there are a number of other domains where we can make improvement in the environmental footprint. Some of those are listed here in terms of precision agriculture that limits the application of fertilizer, in rice to drain the wetlands to reduce methane production, a recent publication in Nature about using silicates to capture carbon in farmland, use of bacteria for nitrogen fixation, in livestock, improving productivity so we can have fewer animals, use of probiotics, and recycling of manure and carbon capture. And these sorts of technologies are really have the potential to dramatically not only lower the environmental footprint, but even potentially give us a positive environmental footprint. But we also know with climate change, we have effects on agriculture itself. And it's not only the increase in temperature, but it is the wide fluctuations we're seeing in weather and in temperature that is really hitting plant agriculture hard, reducing yields. But we also see in animal agriculture, while animals are more resistant to temperature fluctuations, the increased flooding that comes with climate change has wreaked havoc around the world for animal agriculture. And again, we're seeing other types of innovations emerge. We're seeing more local production of food through urban agriculture initiatives. Controlled environmental agriculture has the possibility of reducing chemical inputs by as much as 90–95%. And you can get the same yields on about 1/10 of the amount of land that you see in conventional agriculture. However, it is still highly energy intensive, increasing the environmental footprint, and is not yet cost competitive with conventional agriculture. We also see new expectations around the health effects of the food system. And I just want to quickly highlight this 2017 report from the National Academy of Sciences Food and Nutrition Board on developing dietary referent intakes based on chronic disease endpoints. Where in the past, we used to set nutrient-based guidance based on measures of nutrient status or nutrient deficiency, increasingly, we've been pivoting to use those chronic disease endpoints. That is, to use food to prevent or manage chronic disease. And what we're seeing now is an acceleration of that focus with the publication of this framework report that really talks about how one might go about setting a chronic disease endpoint to establish, again, nutrient intake values or recommendations. But in doing so, we have to remember that chronic diseases are complex traits. This requires us to take more of a systems biology approach and a systems approach to understand how nutrients interact with physiology and metabolism and how that then leads to disease. So again, we're seeing these new expectations now being operationalized in how we go about setting policies and practices. This has further been accelerated now this year in 2020 with strategic plans that have been released both from the NIH and the USDA that have focused on nutrition research with a heavy evidence on precision. That is, understanding how food interacts with people, especially in the chronic disease relationship, And the precision aspect is how population heterogeneity and nutrient food needs differ among individuals in that food, nutrient, chronic disease relationship. But again, emphasizing heterogeneity, emphasizing how we have to take more of a systems approach to understanding that connection of food with people. Now, we also have to keep in mind that if we are going to achieve these new expectations of the food system, we are going to have to also advance our understanding of the economics of the food system. The food system is a major part of the US economy. 10%, it accounts for about 10% of US employment, 5.4% of GDP, right? But we also know if we want to achieve the health and environmental outcomes of the food system that we all aspire to achieving, we are going to have to address the environmental and health effects of the food system in terms of how we make the economics work for that. We also have to understand how we create new markets for farmers and ranchers for carbon sequestration so that agriculture can become carbon neutral or carbon positive. But the economics has to align with both the environment and with the health outcomes of the food system. Now, as you're all aware, COVID-19 has impacted the food system across the entire agriculture and food value chain. And very recently, last month, the Board on Agriculture and Natural Resources held a webinar on this topic of COVID-19 in the food system that included both the former United States Secretary of Agriculture and a former Secretary of the California Department of Food and Agriculture. And I'll just highlight some of the key points that were raised in that webinar in yellow here. And that is the food system we've seen from COVID is not broken, but it was not as resilient as it should have been to a national crisis. And in fact, we have to learn how to pivot quicker when consumer behavior change and markets change. They recommended that we introduce scenario planning like FEMA and the Department of Defense do, looking at various dynamics of their systems, because we know that COVID-19 impacted the food system and we weren't prepared for that. But we also know that climate change is also a threat to agriculture, and we need to begin to prepare for that now. Secretary Vilsack also spoke about exciting times in ag when we have the ability to design food for an individual's DNA, that precision nutrition idea that's in the NIH nutrition roadmap, and that will have an impact on how we think about agriculture. But again, this also, COVID-19 really highlighted how those with diet-related chronic disease are the most vulnerable to this virus in terms of morbidity and mortality, and how the adverse health effects of this virus have disproportionately affected the underserved minority populations, especially those who work within the food system. So where are we? The mandate is certainly clear in terms of what the new expectations of the food system are, but the pathway is not. And what's critical is that we bring the highest level of science we can to achieve these new expectations of the food system. And that's why this workshop is so important. So the National Academy of Science, Engineering, and Medicine is the national think tank. And the Food and Nutrition Board has led in addressing the most important societal issues by convening the relevant sectors and stakeholders to reach those science-based and actionable solutions through the inclusive process that bring all relevant sectors together. So today's Food Forum workshop, Healthy People, Healthy Planet, continues in that spirit. So I encourage all of you who are listening to think about the many expectations we have of food and agriculture and how collectively we can achieve the new expectations through science-based solutions and ensure agriculture and food systems are sustainable for generations to come. So in this workshop, we're going to be focusing on 3 sessions over the next 2 days. We're going to be talking about vulnerabilities, resilience, and transformation. And again, thank you very much for being with us today and really look forward to the vibrant discussions I know we're going to have. So thank you.